Please be seated. The subcommittee will come to order. Before we get into this, I just want to say we did our second field hearing. The first field hearing for the entire committee was done in Ranking Member Levin's district. He represents Camp Pendleton, and I thought that was fantastic. And I want to thank you personally and professionally for coming to Wisconsin. And we did another field hearing on TAP, and I think it was very, very successful. And you really showed yourself to be a dedicated legislator and a consummate professional, sir. Thank you. So thank you. I guess that was is that a point of personal privilege? I don't know. There's some language for that, but I really mean that. It was awesome. You did great. And Ms. Ramirez, I apologize for being tardy. I want to thank everybody for being here today to discuss how we can ensure that our transitioning service members are receiving the mental health support they may need before, during, and after transition. And as always, I appreciate the nonpartisan nature of this subcommittee. We got a little squirrely this morning, honest to goodness, and we don't need that here, the politics. Myself, I'm guilty of it also, Ms. Ramirez, so if I said something to offend you earlier, I apologize publicly and privately, if you would like also. You're also a professional, ma'am. So we're just not going to do that here. We're just not. It's no secret to anyone, as a former SEAL, fixing the TAP program for our transitioning service members is something I'm very passionate about. I've had over 21 of my friends, actually 21, commit suicide. Navy SEALs that you never heard about. And, you know, one is too many, 21 is very troubling. We've made improvements in the transition assistance program. One of my top priorities during the Congress, and have advanced numerous bills in that direction. I know change doesn't happen overnight, but for some of our veterans, if change is not implemented soon, it will be too late. The scourge of suicide takes an average of 17 veterans' lives a day, and I believe that number is not accurate. I believe it's much higher because the way the Veterans Administration actually records suicide, so I believe it's much more than that. Data shows that in recent years, many of our veterans who died by suicide had transitioned from the military no less than 2 years prior to the death. The year before transitioning service members are discharged and 2 years after are the most dangerous time for a new veteran, especially those who are younger and are trying to navigate the civilian world. The issue is that in a millisecond, you lose your uniform, your rank, your authority, anywhere from half to your entire paycheck. And the joke with my wife and several other military spouses is twice the husband, half the paycheck. That's real. How many spouses do we have here? In 2020, the suicide rate for veterans who had transitioned from the military just 1 year prior was twice as high as the national average, and that statistic keeps me up at night, and it should keep everybody up at night, especially people sitting on this panel. These veterans are not just numbers. They are my friends. They are the people that have ensured that we have the ability to conduct this hearing in peace. We just simply have to make sure that we do better, and we can. There's got to be some actual accountability in these programs for the failures that have been identified. These agencies cannot simply check a box and call these programs a success. One life lost, again, is too many. The Government Accountability Office has identified numerous ways that we're failing to connect our service member with mental health services. The warm handover process is not happening as it should. Who in the federal government or personnel on these bases is accountable, and what can we do to change it? This isn't just a big hand little map issue. We identify people and hold them accountable. We got to start doing that. The In-Transition program, which is supposed to ensure service members with identified mental health issues are connected with the mental health provider after transition, is not connecting with service members about 70% of the time. According to the Government Accountability Office's In-Transition has a successful contact rate of 2%. So who in the DOD is accountable for calling these programs a success and coming back here and getting money every year? It's 2%. It's absurd. I'm very frustrated by DOD's failure to respond to the GAO's recommendations immediately. And to my knowledge, DOD only did so after I sent a letter to them asking about these recommendations for their plan to improve this program to reach actual service members, and I believe I'll be reading the response that I got back because it makes absolutely no sense at all. I don't want to hear platitudes any longer. I don't want to hear any excuses today. I want to hear concrete ideas for how we're going to reach the goal, and that is to get in contact with as many veterans and vulnerable veterans as possible. With that, I'd like to yield to Ranking Member Levin for his opening remarks.
Thank the Chairman for your dedication to this topic, and thank you for your hospitality as well. Had a great time in La Crosse. I learned that, well, La Crosse is, roughly halfway between Green Bay and Minneapolis. You do not cheer for the Vikings, you cheer for the Packers. And excellent cheese curds. And again, really appreciate your whole staff as well. Excellent field hearing. And I think it's archived on the internet somewhere, hopefully?
It is. It was on ESPN, the Ocho, which is, as we know, it's C-SPAN.
But it was really good. And then hearing from, some of the veterans themselves, I think in particular, was really impactful. We've done a number of hearings on transition, and we've actually made some great progress. Thinking back in the 5.5 years I've been doing this, I remember my friend Jody Arrington and I got the Bill Mulder legislation across the finish line. That's named after a friend of Jody's from high school that tragically took his own life after service. And we now have the off-base transition training program, the pilot, better late than never. We're getting that off the ground. Certainly look forward to discussing that with you in future hearings. But a lot to cover today. And as service members prepare to end their active duty military service, it's critical that they have effective support to reintegrate into civilian life, especially important for those who may be at risk for a difficult transition. We know that connecting veterans with services as early as possible will help prevent a crisis, and the best time to do that is before their exit from the military. Separation is a milestone characterized by a variety of stressors and adjustment challenges. Recent studies have shown that the risk of a veteran dying by suicide is particularly elevated during the first year after the separation from the military. That's why I introduced the TIER Act, the Transition to Improvement by Estimating Risk Act, which would add new screening criteria to better tailor the transition process to individuals. We need to also ensure that transitioning service members have access to the health care that they need as soon as possible after they separate from the military. Ranking Member Takano has the Ensuring Veterans Smooth Transition Act, and that's what that legislation would do, would automatically enroll veterans into VA health care unless the veteran opts out upon discharge from active duty. It appears there are a number of services and different things happening, some of which are working, some of which need to be working better. The GAO report in particular concerned me on how some of these programs are being implemented and their relative effectiveness. TAP is jointly administered by 7 federal agencies. Think of that, 7 federal agencies. And this adds just complexity, layers of complexity. And ensuring each and every service member receives the support or assistance that he or she needs is complicated by the fact that you have so many agencies involved. GAO found that from April 1st, 2021 to March 31st, 2023, 4,300 service members who were considered at risk of having challenges during transition did not receive a warm handover. 4,300. The warm handover means person-to-person connection from TAP to agency partners that provide services and resources. That could mean VA, it could mean the labor folks. That's tailored to the veteran's needs. That's the key. I'm worried that warm handovers are not happening. That is not acceptable when we're talking of thousands and thousands of people. That means veterans are falling into the cracks. That means they're falling literally into the cracks between the agencies. And that just simply cannot be happening. I'm also concerned that TAP is not a priority for the DOD. And for the chairman, we have been concerned about this for 6 years, that the DOD does not have that same level of urgency when it comes to TAP. According to GAO, 11,000 service members transitioning between April 1st, 2021 and March 21st, 2022 that were considered Tier 3, meaning they were at risk of having a difficult transition, did not attend at least a portion of the required core TAP classes. That's 22% of the service members in the sample. Tells me DOD is not focused enough on this. I know DOD has many other priorities, important priorities. Their job is to fight and win war. But I also believe that taking proper care of service members and their families during the transition out of the military helps enable the DoD to do their core mission. Every successfully reintegrated veteran shows the next generation the opportunities that are provided through service, and every veteran in crisis gives potential enlistees pause. So we can't accept the status quo. Ranking Member Takano and I have met with former Secretary Chuck Hagel and the Veterans Justice Commission. I took note of their finding that there's no single primary entity or person accountable for the effectiveness of transition. I also found their recommendation for the creation of an Undersecretary of Defense for Transition an interesting idea, though it falls outside of our jurisdiction of the subcommittee. I can't help but wonder if a change like this would provide the structure necessary to make service member transition a priority within DoD. I know that in the lead up to November, we're going to be seeing a lot of finger pointing. It's silly season. But I don't see this topic as an attack on any party or any administration, because this problem has existed as long as I have been around under different administrations. We're here to call out the culture within DoD and push to provide frontline commanders, service members, and their families the time and resources to make informed, thought-through decisions about their reintegration into civilian life. This is going to continue to be a priority for us, regardless of what happens with any election. The last thing I'll say, and thank you for giving me this time, we need to have a serious discussion on which committee has primary jurisdiction of TAP. And I've been saying this, and I believe you share this opinion. The implications of a good or bad transition on preventing veteran death by suicide are too important to be at the mercy of an annual NDAA cycle. Fixes need to come quickly and as standalone legislation. And so I'm a little biased being on HVAC, but I think that this is where primary jurisdiction should be. So I thank the chairman for the time. Look forward to working on this for a long time to come, and I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Ranking Member Levin. And for the record, I concur with you that this does not belong anywhere but here. We bear the brunt of poor decisions made by the DoD. This committee does, and the families do. And I feel that we have a moral obligation to fulfill the duty, which is to make sure that we take care of our veterans in a life cycle. I'd like to now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Melissa Cohen, Executive Director of Outreach, Transition, and Economic Development at the Veterans Benefits Administration. Ms. Cohen is accompanied by Ms. DeBoard. Did I get that right? Excellent. Executive Director of Care Management and Social Work at the Veterans Health Administration. Our second witness is Ms. Susan Orcega, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Services Policy and Oversight at the Department of Defense. I want to thank you for coming. To my knowledge, you're only the second person from the Department of Defense that has been here. And we ask you guys all the time, and we get blown off all the time. So thank you. It's probably going to get worse from here, ma'am. I'll just be honest with you. Our third witness is Alyssa Hundrup, Director of Healthcare at the Government Accountability Office. And our final witness is Mr. James Rodriguez, my friend, Assistant Secretary for Veterans Employment and Training Service at the Department of Labor. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Very well, thank you. Let the record reflect that witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Ms. Cohen, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you. Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss access to mental health care programs and services during the transition from military to civilian life. Accompanying me today is Jill DeBoard, licensed clinical social worker, executive director, care management, and social work services. Within VA, our focus is on increasing transparency, improving collaboration, and keeping veterans at the center of everything we do. Support for transitioning service members is an interagency effort. The VA, Department of Defense, and Department of Labor, for example, work to ensure transitioning service members and veterans are equipped with the knowledge, tools, and skills needed to meet their career readiness standards, as well as have access to the benefits and services they have earned and deserve. While VA has implemented several successful avenues like Solid Start to connect service members and veterans with needed resources, we have more work collectively to do. During During VA's portion of the Transition Assistance Program, we outline many critical topics to include community resources, disability compensation, education, and healthcare benefits. We cover support for housing insecurity, homelessness, military sexual trauma, as well as discuss the warning signs and risk factors related to suicide. We also underscore the value of the Veteran Crisis Line, prioritizing mental health. During this course, VA introduces veteran service organizations to facilitate on-the-ground community relationships. We now use sign-up sheets during TAP course to encourage same-day scheduling, hoping to surpass the 53,000 one-on-one appointments conducted last year. VA's clinical transition process, which is available to service members prior to leaving the military, is through the VA Liaison Program. Social workers and nurses coordinate the transition of healthcare to include mental health care when clinically indicated to meet the needs of each service member. Through this process, the transitioning service member is registered for VA healthcare and connected to the post-9/11 military to VA case management program at their home VA medical facility. Over 80% of the time, these service members have initial VA healthcare appointments scheduled prior to discharge from the military. In fiscal year 2023, more than 14,000 service members received a coordinated transition of care from DoD to VA through the VA Liaison Program. Since the program's inception in 2003, over 178,000 service members have had their care transitioned through this clinical process. Assistance continues post-separation with the VA Solid Start program. In this program, VA calls all eligible veterans, regardless of their character of discharge, at 3 key stages: 90 days, 180 days, and 365 days post-separation, during their first year after separation from active duty. Using data provided by DoD, Solid Start provides priority contact to veterans meeting certain risk factors during their last year of active duty. VA has focused efforts to improve the Solid Start successful connection rate, achieving incremental improvements from approximately 57% in 2020 to 77.7% in 2023. Although we are proud of this improvement, we will not be satisfied until we successfully connect with every recently separated veteran, helping them connect with the benefits and services they have earned. These are just a few examples of how VA is working to ensure transitioning service members and veterans are supported during this process. We appreciate the committee's continued support and collaboration in the shared mission. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. My colleague and I are ready to answer any questions you and the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. The written statement of Ms. Cohen will be entered into the hearing record. Ms. Ortega, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony on behalf of the Department of Defense.
Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member 11, and distinguished members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you here today. I'm pleased to represent the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Health Affairs to discuss the Department of Defense's commitment to mental health support programs for separating service members. The DoD is committed to providing the highest level of mental health services for our members. We ensure that those who serve in the nation receive timely and high-quality care, including care to address their mental health needs. You know, this is particularly important during transition from military to civilian life, when service members are most vulnerable to suicide and some experiencing challenges, such as the loss of sense of purpose, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other mental health symptoms. In this testimony, we will inform the subcommittee about the department's current mental health programs and resources during the transition from military to civilian life, and including the In-Transition Program and the Transition Assistance Program, TAP. The DoD created the In-Transition Program in 2010 in response to a 2007 report by the Department of Defense Task Force on Mental Health, which revealed that a number of service members were disengaging from mental health care treatment as they transitioned from the Department of Defense to the Veterans Healthcare System. For the past 14 years, the In-Transition has facilitated continuity of care in connection to mental health resources for service members as they move into civilian life. The In-Transition program supports all transitioning service members and veterans, regardless of the duration of service, time since discharge or category of discharge. All service members who are leaving the military service and who have received care for mental health and/or moderate to severe traumatic brain injury within 1 year of separation are also automatically enrolled into this program, and service members can also get connected to services that through either self or provider referrals. The DoD also implements TAP, which is a result of the interagency partnership between the Department of Defense, the VA, the Departments of Labor, Education, Homeland Security, Small Business Administration, and the Office of Personnel Management. TAP addresses the many facets of the service members' transition while providing information, resources, and tools to service members to help them prepare for their move from military to civilian life. The mental health of service members remains a priority of the Department of Defense, and we are continuously identifying opportunities to improve the delivery of mental health support for those who serve our nation. A recent GAO report examined elements of the DoD in Transition Program and the DoD-VA Joint Executive Committee's assessment of the effectiveness of their efforts to facilitate access to mental health services for transitioning service members. The DoD reviewed the GAO report and recommendations, and a formal comment from the department is in progress. Thank you for your continued support of the health and well-being of our service members in inviting me to be here with you today to discuss this important issue of continuity of mental health support services for transitioning service members. We recognize we have more work to do and much more progress to make in support of our service members when they transition into civilian life. We remain committed to enabling service members to receive the necessary mental health support that they need during this life-changing and important transition. I look forward to your questions.
The gentlelady yields back. Thank you, Ms. Ortega. The written statement of Ms. Ortega will be entered into the hearing record. Ms. Hundrup, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony on behalf of the Government Accountability Office.
Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work on DoD and VA efforts to provide mental health support for service members and veterans during their transition from military to civilian life. The transition period can be fraught with challenges as service members adjust to social and civilian life outside of the structured military. Tragically, as has already been mentioned, studies have found that the suicide rate for veterans in their first year of separation is about 2.5 times higher than that of the active duty population. My testimony today covers findings and recommendations we have made related to 3 different VA and DoD programs that are in place to support service members and veterans during the transition period. In July, we reported on DoD's In Transition program, a program intended to facilitate connections to mental health services during times of transition. The program identifies individuals for automatic enrollment if they meet certain criteria, including the use of mental health care in the year prior to their separation. However, we found several concerns with this program. First, In Transition does not identify eligible individuals until 2 to 3 months after their separation. This falls during the last 9 months of the 24-month transition period, which may result in a gap in assistance during a particularly vulnerable time. Second, In Transition is often unable to successfully reach eligible individuals, due in part to outreach that relies on cold telephone calls. We found the program was unable to successfully contact over 70% of enrollees. This means that individuals were dropped from participating before they were potentially even aware that assistance could be provided. We recommended that In Transition identify eligible service members prior to their separation, as well as expand methods of outreach, such as through emails or texts, to better reach individuals and ensure their continuity of care. Lastly, we found that In Transition lacked performance goals, and we recommended that it establish them to help assess the program's effectiveness. This would help decision makers identify improvements and hold the program accountable. In March of this year, we reported on DoD's warm handover process within its Transition Assistance Program. Through person-to-person connections, warm handovers are intended to assist service members who may be at risk, such as with gaps in medical care, unemployment, or homelessness. However, we identified several issues with DoD's warm handover process. For example, we found that DoD does not know why some service members who are at risk for a challenging transition are not receiving those warm handovers. Our analysis found that at least 4,300 service members who separated from the military during a 2-year period should have received one, but did not. We also found that DoD has not reliably verified who is receiving a warm handover or assessed their helpfulness, such as confirming whether individuals received needed services. We made a number of recommendations to improve the warm handover process, including that DoD determine why service members may not be receiving them, better verify when they're occurring, and assess the helpfulness of the process. In January of 2023, we also reported on aspects of VA's Solid Start program, a program that supports the well-being of new veterans by helping them to connect with mental health and other services. Of note, Solid Start prioritizes earlier outreach to those who received mental health care in the year prior to separation. In May 23, VA implemented our recommendation to work with veterans organizations to address outreach gaps and assess strategies for hard-to-reach groups, such as those experiencing homelessness. Finally, in light of the many programs DoD and VA have in place, we have recommended the two departments work together through the Joint Executive Committee to assess the effectiveness of their programs overall in facilitating access to mental health across the transition period, and importantly, address any identified gaps. In closing, DoD and VA have taken steps to implement some of our recommendations. However, continued leadership attention and critical improvements are needed to ensure transitioning service members and veterans have the mental health support they need and deserve. This concludes my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hundrup. The written statement of Ms. Hundrup will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Rodriguez, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your testimony on behalf of the Department of Labor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Successful employment is one key to economic success and can strongly impact physical and mental health, life expectancy, and the quality of life. Veterans with service-connected disabilities, including mental health conditions, often experience relatively low labor participation rates and high unemployment compared to their non-disabled counterparts. Research indicates that unemployment can adversely affect mental health and is associated with a higher risk of suicide among veterans. And veterans with mental health conditions, particularly those at risk of or experiencing homelessness, may face increased risk of suicide following job loss. To address these issues, it is critical for transitioning service members and veterans to receive the employment and training support that they need. DOL Vets administers the employment component of the Transition Assistance Program. As detailed in my written testimony, we have made great strides in developing a number of innovative employment curriculums and working with public and private partners to connect participants to the services they need. For example, participants of the TAP Employment Navigator and Partnership Program have faster transitions from the military service to civilian employment and higher wages. And while EMPP aims to get the military to civilian transition right from the start, we recognize that not all journeys are linear. The Off-Base Transition Training Program is designed as a safety net for veterans who may have fallen outside the traditional transition path. It offers a flexible, no wrong door approach, meeting veterans where they are and in their post-service life to provide support whenever it's needed. When TAP participants need mental health care or other services, we provide person-to-person referrals to DOL's American Job Centers and other partners when needed. DOL's American Job Centers are one-stop locations that offer a broad range of employment and wraparound supportive services, which includes linkages to physical and mental health care, as well as referrals to the Veteran Readiness and Employment Program at the Department of Veterans Affairs and other services and programs in their local communities. It is important to note that veterans receive priority of service for all workforce training programs funded in whole or in part by the Department of Labor. VETS administers the Jobs for Veterans State Grant Program, which provides funding for dedicated staff who work in the American Job Centers to provide individualized career and training-related services to eligible veterans, and to assist employers to fill their workforce needs with job-seeking veterans. This includes, but is not limited to, veterans who self-identify as having a physical or mental health disability, as well as veterans experiencing homelessness. VETS has leveraged our available flexibilities to expand program eligibility and ensure the delivery of quality service to our veterans. Veterans experiencing homelessness face specific challenges, including higher prevalence rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as physical disabilities and challenges transitioning to civilian life. VETS administers the Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, or HVRP, which is designed to address these barriers and empower veterans to secure good jobs in stable and high-demand occupations paying livable wages. HVRP programs partner closely with their local American Job Centers, helping veterans experiencing homelessness reintegrate into the workforce by providing employment and wraparound services, including mental health care, suicide prevention services, and addiction counseling. All of the services I've discussed are critical to veterans, especially those struggling with unemployment, which can negatively impact mental health and create difficult experiences. We have made important investments in veteran benefits and health care, and I urge Congress to similarly invest in our veterans employment programs, as well as the personnel who help facilitate these programs. I am committed to working with the subcommittee and our many partners and stakeholders to ensure the best transition for our service members and their families, and to connect them to mental health and other services that they need. Chairman Van Orden, Ranking Member Levin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this hearing, and as always, I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. The written statement of Mr. Rodriguez will be entered into the hearing record. I'm now going to proceed to questioning, and I would like to recognize Ranking Member Levin for 5 minutes to question the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I've got a bunch of questions. We'll get through as much as we can in 5 minutes. Hopefully we'll have a second round if there's time for it. I want to start with DOD. I want to, as Chairman said, thank you for being here, and all, honesty, it's really reassuring, and this is what we need. I can tell you, we appreciate your record of service as well. I believe you're in the Commission Corps of the Public Health Service was your background. I'm very grateful for that service. I hope you agree with the statement, every successfully reintegrated veteran shows the next generation the opportunities provided through service, and every veteran in crisis gives potential enlistees pause. So yes, you agree with that? Good. We have a huge problem here, okay, according to information that we've seen. You've got tens of thousands of high-risk service members that are not attending their TAP classes the way they're supposed to be. What are you doing? This is not your fault, right? It's not you. But what is the department doing to enforce the current mandated timelines for attendance for TAP? And how are you holding the services accountable for doing this?
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the question. First of all, I think we recognize there's so much more work to be done. And while the office that I work under is not responsible for the TAP, under Health Affairs, we're responsible for the policies and the guidance that influence TAP. So I am committed to taking back to those service military departments this point about TAP and ways of which we can work better.
So I appreciate your answer. And again, it's not your fault, but the inability to, do something about it yourself, I think, is a symptom of the department not having a single person or entity responsible. And it's deeply frustrating. I think we have to work on a bipartisan basis here. We've got to do everything we can to try to address this. We've heard veterans express concern and frustration. They didn't feel the level of support that they needed. They felt rushed. I've heard this personally, rushed through the process. They're given a lot of information in a very short period of time, and they are perceived, and I've heard this from multiple transitioning service members in the last number of years, that they're being treated significantly differently as soon as they communicate their decision to leave the military. So how is the department addressing all of this, and what changes can you commit to? Again, in your limited capacity, but what changes can you personally commit to help shift the culture and the priorities related to those who are separating from military service?
Again, thank you for the question. Since I've been appointed, I've identified mental health as one of my big focuses in my portfolio. And my team is committed to mental health of our service members, both active duty and then transitioning members. And there's really 3 focuses. One, reducing the stigma. We've got to do better at reducing stigma. And 2, increasing awareness. And then 3, promoting the capacity of those that have behavioral health professionals who can touch and tap into reaching and connecting with those individuals.
I think all that sounds great. I think there is fundamentally a culture shift that needs to occur as well. And look forward to further discussion in the months and years ahead. With the time I have left for now, I want to turn to Solid Start. Director Hundrup, thank you for the work that you provided, very enlightening. Does VA's Solid Start program have a more effective outreach strategy than In Transition for connecting with new veterans in need of mental health services? And if so, could you expand on that?
Thank you. Yes, we did find some notable differences between the two programs, particularly that Solid Start has been more successful in reaching veterans. To put a point on it, in our work, we found that Solid Start was able to successfully reach over 70% of veterans. In contrast, the In Transition program during the time period we looked at was not able to successfly contact 72%.
So I get that, but why?
So, right, so I think there are key differences.
18 seconds.
Okay, key differences in their outreach strategies. Solid Start is using different methods, many different phone calls at different points in the year. In Transition makes just
Hold
a few
that
phone
thought, because
calls.
I'm going to come back to you,
Okay.
assuming he gives me a chance.
Okay.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Ms. Ramirez from the great state of Illinois for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. As a member of the subcommittee, I've been really proud to stand beside my colleagues who recognize the importance and the value of investing in mental health support programs. So thank you, Chairman, for this committee hearing. We really are at a critical moment where mental health is at the forefront of hearings, of discussions, of roundtables across several congressional committees, obviously including this one. And why? It's because the communities we serve, they can't wait no longer. We have the ability to treat and provide support for these struggling with mental health, and we have to use every single tool in our toolbox so that we can ensure that these resources are widely available and that they're known. I can't emphasize enough that as a member of this committee, we're advocating for all veterans, and that includes women veterans, that includes veterans of color, and certainly disabled veterans. Every single veteran deserves quality, accessible mental health support, especially while they're going through the process of transitioning to civilian life. And supporting our veterans means we have to support them through these transitions, and we have to equip them with the resources, including mental health support, to ensure they can live a full and happy life. So my question is for Ms. Cohen. Ms. Cohen, my concern is that the VA has all of these resources available, but not everyone is aware of them. Actually, quite a number of our veterans don't have access to this information. So what are you doing to do a better job at ensuring awareness of the resources, the services, and the benefits available to them?
Thank you for that question. There's a number of things outside of the TAP course where we provide comprehensive outline of all the benefits and services. But if you are not able to attend TAP, or maybe it's been now a long time, we've now started an off-base transition training where it's a virtual opportunity to hear about our benefits and services again. We've also implemented a new outreach strategy where I've worked with all the 56 regional offices, and we've asked that they come forward with a plan that's data-informed, that they better understand their communities. In FY25, you will see a focus on counties that have never received outreach before. We're also asking for increased stakeholder engagement. The 3 top topics will be homelessness, rural communities, and focuses on women for FY25. So those are a few of the examples of how we're stretching and trying to reach more veterans.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. And I guess this question is almost a follow-up, but this one is for Ms. Cohen and Ms. Orsiga. Can you both explain how the DOD and the VA are ensuring that transitioning service members, especially those with unplanned or unexpected transitions, and those with disabilities, are provided the access and resources to all the benefits available in the short time they have before exiting the military? And I guess we can start with you, Ms. Orsiga.
Thank you again for the question. I think one of the things, first of all, is, as we previously mentioned, is we have mechanisms in place where the Department of Defense, the in-transition program particularly that I can speak to under Health Affairs, has connections and really starts to look at connecting with the folks on the VA side in terms of bridging those gaps and leaning in. I think also, I would say, is each separating service member is not a one-stop shop, meaning it's each individual is different, has different needs and different resources. And so in the time that I've come on board, I've talked to a variety of different staff across the department and those inside of Health Affairs and outside in the military departments, and really to try to look at those resources and, as you pointed out, kind of bring all those tools together so that we are capitalizing on not just one-stop tool, but multiple tools and resources to tackle the behavioral issues.
Great. Ms. Cohen, when you answer, because our time is running out, can you also answer this last question I have here? Are there plans for the DOD and the VA to allocate additional resources to enhance mental health support available during the military to civilian transition? So if you can speak to that as well.
Thank you so much. Very quickly, we try to reach every single veteran that transitions to your first question. So some of the successes of Solid Start are we're going to email them and talk about the benefits. We give them a welcome packet. We talk about it in TAP, and we're going to call them 21 times if needed to connect. It is a priority for our organizations to collaborate and continue focus on this topic of mental
The gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Ramirez, if you'd like a second round of questioning, we're more than happy to do that.
Yeah, great.
Very well. The chair now recognizes Mr. McGarvey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. As you all know, a robust and well-supported transition is critical to preventing our veterans from falling through the cracks. However, I've got to echo the frustrations of my friends and colleagues on the dais here that there's a disconnect in how seriously DOD is taking transition and its implementation. Ms. Orsiga, I understand from the GAO report on access to mental health services that you all plan to release the Enterprise Individualized Self-Assessment in 2025. I think what concerns me is that we have not yet addressed the attendance issues that seem to be prevalent within TAP. So according to the GAO's December 2022 analysis of TAP data, nearly a quarter of service members who were required to attend TAP did not do so. And 70% didn't start TAP more than 1 year in advance of their separation, as is supposed to happen. That's incredibly concerning. We've heard from veterans on an individual level. Commanders sometimes don't make time for their service members to attend the needed classes. We've also heard on a structural level that there is a pervasive and lingering culture across the DoD that makes TAP a back burner issue. Or worse, they just don't care. That's unacceptable. This must be a partnership. VA can't carry the weight all on its own shoulders. So, Ms. Orsiga, my question to you is, what steps are you all taking to ensure that every service member attends TAP and that individual commanders and others responsible for service members' time comply with requirements?
Thank you very much, Congressman. So while I'm not responsible for the TAP within my responsibilities, I understand the frustration, and I'm committed to carrying this information and this message back to the departments. Each of the departments are responsible for the TAPs, and what Health Affairs does and what is in my responsibility focus is looking at those policies and working towards the guidance that implements and informs the TAP program. So I'm committed to taking that message back to the department.
Thank you for taking it back. And who is responsible for TAP?
Each military service department is responsible for the execution of the TAP within each of their services.
Because I don't want this to be an example of where everyone can point the finger at somebody else and then no one becomes accountable. So who would be the most accountable to getting our service members to actually do the TAP services?
Important question. Each of the service members that are connected and assigned to each of the service military departments, that's predominantly where the individual TAP counselors are assigned to each of those service members.
And what steps are being taken to ensure that those service members determined to be at risk for a difficult transition actually attend all their required core TAP classes?
Thank you for that question. And while I'm not responsible for TAP and the execution of it, I will take that question for the record.
And to whom will you take that question?
I'll take that question back to the department, and we'll take it for the record.
And which department or which person?
Each service department executes the TAP program. So each of those military departments, so if you're in the Navy, if you're in the Army, et cetera, et cetera.
And is there a specific person or office in each one of those departments?
I'll take that information back, and we'll take that for the record.
Right. But when you say you're taking it to the Navy, that's just a big entity for us. Who?
So each of the services, if you look at the commands and down to the individual service members unit, all of those individuals, as they separate, as they retire, they have counselors, and those counselors then meet with those individuals. So we'll have to get those details for you and get that information back to you.
That would be great, because I feel like we all want the same thing, but I don't have an answer to the questions yet. And so this is really important to all of us, and I would just love to know specifically who you're going to take that information to that is capable of implementing it, because that would help us have some accountability.
Understood.
Thanks so much. And I see I'm short on time, but appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Cohen, you said you contacted 14,000 veterans? Is that right? 14,200 something in your testimony?
Thank you for that. Let me just.
So I believe page 2 out of 11 of your written testimony. The answer is yes. So,
Yes.
okay,
I'm sorry.
so you've contacted 14,000 out of how many?
Thank you for that question, and that's specific to VHA, and I will turn that over to my colleague, Ms. DeBoard.
All right.
Thank you for that question, and thank you, Ms. Cohen. So you're speaking, Representative, to the VA Liaison for Healthcare program?
Yes.
Yes. In my humble opinion, a best practice for transitioning veteran service members
100%
safely
you're not
to-
answering the question I asked. I said you contacted 14,000 according to Ms. Cohen's testimony. Out of how many?
out of
The
the
answer is
200,000 that would
That's
have been.
0.07%. Okay, where I come from, that's failure. I certainly would not come up here in front of this committee and tout that as a good number. That's horrible. That's 0.07%. Ms. Ortega, I wrote a letter, it's really detailed, fancy words and stuff, about the GAO report, a whole bunch of things, and I asked this series of questions. There's 9 of them, very detailed. How does the Department of Defense plan to revise transition assistance criteria? How does DOD plan to modify outreach? DOD to coordinate, blah, 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 all this stuff, like super detailed, right? Here's the response. And I will ask unanimous consent that these are both entered into the record without objection, so ordered. The department agrees with the recommendations provided by the GAO report and is currently assessing the feasibility and resources needed to implement the actions and procedures required to adequately address the GAO recommendations. Now, the only thing missing from this is some ranch dressing, because that is straight up word salad. This means nothing, okay? I don't know how many 40-pound brains it took to write that sentence, but it has nothing to do with these very detailed and specific questions that were asked that pertained to one of the most important things we can possibly do, which is transition someone from a productive member of the uniformed services to a productive member of the civilian community. This is wholly unacceptable. And when Mr. McGarvey is asking you a question, you blew him off too. The Navy is not a person. It's not. So when you say, I'm going to take it back, to who? So I was a command career counselor for 2 different commands. And I told everybody, if you're going to get out of the service, you don't talk to anybody but me. And I set them up for success as a civilian in a very open way and did everything. And I had a 100% retention rate because I truthfully looked at these servicemen and women and said, you want to stay, that's great. You don't, that's great too. Let's help you out. So the Department of Defense, writ large, is failing our service members, and you know it. You absolutely know it. You said that this is your testimony. You're not responsible for the TAP program, but you're responsible for the policies that inform the Transition Assistance Program. That doesn't mean anything. It literally means nothing. So these people, you got 7 bosses. So doctrinally, you should have, 6 to 9 direct reports talking to you. You shouldn't have 7 people telling you what to do. And this is just wholly unacceptable. So the culture of the Department of Defense is such, from my direct observation. The DOD recruiting is horrible now, worse since the Vietnam War. And they think if they give our service members a smooth transition to the civilian world, it's going to increase people getting out of the service. That's been proven wrong by naval special warfare. So we have got to do something, and it sure as heck is not this, ma'am. So I'm going to print this for you, and I'd like you to take this, get me answers back, and then I want the names of every single person you're going to bring this to in every one of the uniformed services. And I'd like that by the end of the month. Now, my time has expired, and out of respect for my colleagues, I know that Mr. Levin has got some more questions. We will do a second round of questioning. So I will yield back, and I recognize Ranking Member Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Hundrup, I'm going to pick up right where we left off. Solid Start is working better, more effective outreach strategy than in transition for connecting with new veterans in need of mental health services. The question when we last spoke was why? Specifically, what about Solid Start makes it work better?
Thank you for the question. I think what it boils down to is the level of effort. For example, as my fellow panelists stated, Solid Start sends an advance email, a packet of information, and will call a veteran up to 7 times at each touch point, which is at 3 different points across a 1-year period. Contrast to that to In Transition. In Transition will make up to 3 phone calls, but actually the reality is, depending on demand and the resources, they're really only making 1 or 2 phone calls, depending on the month. And so if they don't make contact, they will then remove the individual from the program if they're unsuccessful in contacting them. So these folks are removed or unenrolled after only 1 or 2 attempts, which is, I think, behind the very abysmal rate that we're seeing in terms of the ability for folks to even know about or participate in the In Transition program. Very quickly, I would just note that we are seeing some overlap across the 2 programs. And particularly that's coming out with the fact that they're identifying the same individuals when it comes to the priority list for the Solid Start as well as the In Transition list. They're calling them via telephone during the same period, which we have heard can be confusing, especially for those that may not understand the programs or determine which one is best. So they're getting a lot of phone calls during a very specific period of time. So, we note that overlap sometimes is warranted. Perhaps that allows for better reach or multiple entry points. But I think that's why I would just emphasize the importance of our recommendation to the Joint Executive Committee to look across these programs, really understand the different touch points when they're happening and be deliberate about that and look for their effectiveness so that we're avoiding any areas or concentrating them in areas when it's just adding to the confusion.
And knowing what you know about the I would say, labyrinth of people in charge of TAP and the limitations that Ms. Ortega has. If you were in her shoes, what would you do right now to implement some of GAO's recommendations?
I mean, the first thing I would do is look to DHA and look to their leadership to hold the transition program accountable. There's very little oversight of in transition program right now that is run by contractors. They have no performance goals. There are no metrics. We heard from the officials themselves that the program is working as intended, which is very troubling. So I think there needs to be leadership within DHA that is monitoring this program and holding the contractor accountable for specific goals, outreaching, getting to those individuals earlier in the transition process, and ensuring they're getting that touch point so that the eligible individuals have a chance to participate in this important resource.
Ms. Hendrick, that seems like an extremely reasonable plan. Ms. Ortega, will you commit to following up in that manner? And if so, how long will it take you, and when can we follow up with you about it?
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the GEO's recommendation. While we may not agree on all of the components of it, the expertise.
Pretty simple, yes or no. Will you
Yes, I will
commit to
commit.
following up in the manner just prescribed by Ms. Hundrup?
Yes, I will
And how
commit.
long will it take you, and when will you follow up with us?
So I will follow up at the beginning of the next fiscal year cycle.
Okay, you'll commit to that, and
Yes,
staff
sir.
will take that back, and we'll follow up with DOD, and we appreciate you continuing to work with us. Definitely Solid Start's working better. It's still not perfect. I'm running short on time, so I'll just make a couple points. VA issued a proposed rule for implementation of the Veteran and Spouse Transitional Assistance Grant Program. That's pretty important to us. Now that VA has funding in hand, when do you expect to open the grant application?
Thank you for the question. The notice of funding opportunity has concluded on August 23rd. We have selected 13 organizations, and we are working on that announcement for release.
Chair now recognizes Mr. McGarvey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And because votes have been called on the floor, I'm going to be brief and turn my questions into a little bit more of a statement/directive. Appreciate you all being here today, and I really do hope that DOD will take TAP and ensuring a smooth transition as seriously as is warranted, and will continue to support our service members through thick and thin, when they're out, when they're in. Mr. Board, thank you. We haven't gotten to some of the VA stuff. I do want to thank you all for your engagement, for your leadership in addressing the social drivers of health and helping our veterans as they transition to civilian life. One thing, I just want to make sure that the VA is not only assessing and providing initial interventions that match veteran families to social resources, but also to see these referrals through to completion. And even in some way, maybe you all are doing it, but making sure there's a systematic way to capture completion data related to the internal consults and community referrals, and to provide necessary follow-ups for veterans who might have just engaged a social worker even one time. Something to think about, and I appreciate you all being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for as much time as I may consume. So in the military, you issue orders and things like that, and one of the things that you do is you have someone restate the mission so that you know that they know what your intent is. So Ms. Ortega, I would like you to restate the mission that was given to you by my colleague from the great state of Kentucky.
So the mission is to get and provide more details for each of the service members, specifically to TAP in terms of how they're connected, who they're connected with, and what are those specific responsibilities of both the counselor, the TAP counselor, and the individual.
So, Mr. McGarvey, is that accurate?
Somewhat, yeah. I think we want to know who is responsible and how this is happening, and who we can actually get this information from as well.
Okay. So this is your mission, ma'am, from Mr. McGarvey. You're going to come back here, and you're going to tell us by department, by name, who is responsible for these specifically, and the series of things that my colleague from the other side of the aisle has asked you will be reported on, and that will happen by the end of the month, or I will personally hold you accountable, because now I have a name. And I think it should be telling to everybody here on this panel and the people behind you that when we all agree there is no daylight between the Republicans and the Democrats on this committee. Zero. And we have to do better. And this, we're going to work harder, we're going to double efforts. No, it's garbage. Unacceptable. So that's your first mission. The second one is I want answers in the English language for these 9 questions that I do not need to put a condiment on, okay? No more word salad. Not doing it. Because our veterans are killing themselves because they have 7 bosses. On that note, today is World Suicide Prevention Day. So if anybody's having any issues, I need you to dial 988 and then press 1. So I am unwilling to have another one of my friends or colleagues or someone that has protected our nation kill themselves because of word salad. It ain't happening. I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I appreciate the discussion. And this is not over. We just have to do better, and we can. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I don't want to go there, okay? So with that, I yield to my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Levin, for any closing statements you may have.
I just appreciate the chairman's commitment to working together in a collaborative way, and I know staff took plenty of notes here on all the things you said you were going to do, and they're going to hold you to it, and had plenty more questions, but until we meet again, thank you for the work that you're doing, and look forward to speaking with you all offline. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you again, everyone, for coming here today, and ma'am, Ms. Ortega, no kidding, I really appreciate you showing up. And by the way, this is the best committee hearing Mr. Rodriguez has ever had. Right? Dude's like, I'm out of here. Woo! I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials without objection. So ordered. The hearing is adjourned.